Good afternoon, students. Today I'll be taking the topic of examination of reflexes. So now, what is a reflex? A reflex is an involuntary response to the stimulus, and it depends upon the integrity of the nervous pathway, that is the sensory pathway and the motor pathway. So what are the learning objectives? It's very important to know for the reflex we should know the learning objectives. Now what are they? What is the purpose of examination of reflex? What is the upper limb tendon reflexes, lower limb tendon reflexes, the other reflexes, abnormalities of the deep tendon reflexes, grading of the reflex, superficial reflexes, neolateral reflexes, and some references. Now, what is a reflex? A reflex, now we should know what are the types of reflex. There is a superficial reflex and a deep reflex. Both follow the pathway of the reflex arc. Now, when we talk about the deep reflex, means we are going to use an apparatus called as the patella hammer. Here in the later slide, I'll show you that this is a patella hammer. Okay, now this patella hammer has got a metallic end and a broad end and a pointed end. Okay, so for some reflexes we are going to use a pointed end, and some reflexes we are going to use a broad end to strike the tendon. Now when we strike the tendon, okay, now I'm talking about the deep reflex. So when we strike the tendon, here you know that in the muscle we have the intrafusal fibers and the extrafusal fibers. So the intrafusal fibers are in the center of the muscle spindle, and the muscle spindle is the receptor for the reflex, for the reflex, okay, for the reflex to take place. So whenever the muscle tendon is strucken, okay, the muscle tendon is strucken, that means we are striking the intrafusal fibers, and from there the sensory pathway will start, and this sensory pathway, it goes to the spinal cord, and from the spinal cord in the gray matter of the spinal cord, in the anterior horn of the spinal cord, then there is an interneuron. Means there is a connection between two synapses. Okay, so it is basically a monosynaptic reflex. In this, the alpha motor neurons have a synaptic interaction, that is the alpha motor neurons have a synaptic interaction with the gamma motor neurons, and finally the motor pathway comes, and then this pathway, the motor neuron, comes to the extrafusal fibers, and by the striking of the tendon, there is a stretch in the muscle which leads to the contraction of the muscle. Now for example, we are talking about the knee jerk. Now in the knee jerk, there will be contraction of the limb. Okay, there will be flexion of the limb, and there will be contraction of the quadriceps femoris muscle. Now the main important thing is that why do we do the purpose of doing this reflexes? It's very important to do these reflex examination, because whether the reflex is present or absent, first thing we should know, why do we use the sentence that this reflex is present or absent? In certain lesions, okay, like when we talk about the upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. Okay, what is the upper motor neuron? These are the neurons which start from the central nervous system to the spinal cord, and the lower motor neurons is from the spinal cord to the muscle. So in certain involvement of these lesions in the upper motor neuron and in the lower motor neuron, okay, whenever there is paralysis, okay, then it leads to the reflexes being absent or present. Now present means what? Present means the person has a like when we talk about grading of the reflexes, what is the grading? It is divided into 1 to 4. 0 means there will be no reflex, 1 means it's present, 2 means it is 2 means it is brisk, 3 means it's very brisk, and 4 means it is exaggerated, and 5 means it is clonus. Now when we say that it is present means there is no abnormality. The reflex is taking place, there is contraction of the muscle and there is flexion of the limb or extension of the limb. But whenever there is an upper motor neuron lesion or a lower motor neuron lesion, like for example if it is an upper motor neuron lesion, there is an involvement of the neurons of the alpha and the gamma motor neuron, alpha and the gamma anterior horn cells of the spinal cord. When these cells are involved, okay, there is an lower motor neuron lesion. Okay, this is observed in poliomyelitis. Okay, and here what happens? What happens? Both the reflexes, the superficial and the deep reflexes, both are absent. Okay, and when we talk about upper motor neuron lesions, this could be a space occupying lesion. It could be a tumor or something in the spinal cord or any in the pathway in the central nervous system. So what happens in this? The pyramidal and the extrapyramidal tracts are involved, and here the superficial reflexes are absent but the deep reflexes are exaggerated. So that's why we talk about